I found a meditation exercise. I took a family photo. And I asked OpenAI how to mix the right color. In the last episode, I locked down the spatial relationship between the PCB and the vertical mounted hard drive cage. Now it's time to start modifying the original hard drive door. This door isn't just for this project. I want to be reusable in the future. So I made a few practical changes. I added a blank area on the front for labeling and opened up extra hoses on the back to help with heat dissipation. After the print finished, the next step was removing supporters. Drills, pliers, hobby knives, each tool has its job depending on where the supports are. Because this is a fully 3D printed hard drive cage, the little details matter. I've got to be patient when cleaning out the supporters, especially around the small holes. I clean the holes with a fine drill bit, finish the type with pliers, and use the hobby knife for the final cleanup. It's not a hard work, but it does demand a steady hand and patience. Don't force anything too much, work the details slowly, bit by bit. After cleaning up all the printed parts and knocking out the last bits of supporting material, I can finally start assembling the door system. Besides the printed pieces, there are a couple of extra parts that make the whole thing feel better to use. A mechanical keyboard switch spring for the bottom and two short pieces of filament that can act as the rotating shafts. I start with the main shaft, then move on to the switch assembly. Drop the spring into place, push the filament through, and the whole rotation mechanism snaps together. Next, the latch. This one needs a firm push to set properly, but only after you have cleaned the supports around it perfectly. This part lacks precision. Yeah, everything works just the way it should. With the door assembled, it's time to move on to the vertical bracket. This piece went through a few rounds of structure improvements, partly for strength, partly reduce weight, and partly minus the footprint. After all measurements and test the fits from the last stage, I finally locked in the position of setup port. I also refined screw mounts, and those didn't show it into the video. The setup cable I'm using here is a little bit longer than ideal, but it just works for testing. I have already ordered a short one, and I will swap it later. With a proper length of screws ready and a hex wrench in hand, I start assembling everything manually. I prefer doing this by hand instead of using power tools. It's much easier to control the force. Some electrical screwdrivers don't have enough torque and leave the screws loose. Others have too much, and that can easily damage the printed structure. Aside from a bit of uncomfortable on hands, there's really no downside. In fact, the repetitive hand motion has a kind of meditative feeling to it. It's quite focused and surprisingly comfortable. I hope you can feel that calm through the build as well. Once the base bracket goes on, the real moment of the truth is dropping the hard drive into the door and check if the SATA extension lands exactly where it should. And it's perfect, no problem. I plug in power, and both the drive and the system come up just fine. Next step, find the right case to bring all of this together. After using the setup for a while, something funny happened. One day I was buying a hamburger. They handed me a paper bag which my order was in it, and suddenly I thought, wait, could I 3D print a paper bag? And if I can, could it work as a hard drive case? So I went online, grabbed a few models, and started printing tests. One of the original designs actually looked pretty promising, so I modified it, printed my own version, and it turned out surprisingly well. I also add a cutout in printed puzzle for PCB power and USB ports, so everything fits. To keep the hard drive from hitting the ground without cushioning, I made all the package taller and slightly bigger than the inside cage. Once the test showed no headache, it's time for paint. To get a good result, I had to break the whole structure into small parts before spraying. By this vision, I'd already swapped the long SATA cable for a short one. And before painting, of course, I took a family photo for all parts. Say cheese! When it comes to painting, make sure be well protected, mask on, gloves on, and work in a well ventilated space. I set up a turntable, and once everything was ready, let's go. For the best coat, I went with a matte black prime. I have used this solution in previous projects, and it always makes acrylic colors pop later on. While editing the spring painting footage, something suddenly clicked. Maybe this rotating table shouldn't be built in that way. If the 3D printed part was suspended, the workflow would be smoother, faster, and a lot more natural for spray painting. Yeah, that feels like a good discovery. So I wrote it down in my notebook to see if it could turn into a real project later. That's the charm of being a DIY YouTuber. One interesting project always reveals the starting point of the next one. Stay creative, folks. After the first coat, I left it for a while, sprayed the second coat, and wait for it to dry completely. This skill kills the PETG reflection and gives the whole surface much more premium look. After spraying the coat, the real challenge hit me, coloring. To be honest, this part was a headache. I don't have any art background, so mixing colors was basically Harry Potter magic to me. But hey, I had ChatGPT, so I typed the problem to AI and started following his guidance step by step. At first, I didn't trust it, so I only used a tiny bit of paint for initial mix. I ripped a piece of cardboard from a package and used that as my comparison and a color palette. Once the tools were ready, I dove in, with maybe 40% confidence at best. The whole time I was worried about my skills and honestly about whether AI even knew what it was talking about. But somehow it worked, and that surprised me. Covering a large area with acrylic might look boring from the outside, but when you are the one doing it, it's actually pretty fun because you are watching something take shape from nothing. My plan was to lay down 2 coats for acrylic, and I figured the amount of paint I had would at most cover the first layer. You will notice that I painted some areas and completely skipped others. That was partly laziness and partly because I simply don't have enough paint for the first mix. I decided to sacrifice a few hidden corners and called it good for now. For instance, I didn't paint the lower edge for the package inside because 90% of the time you will never see that color from any angle. In the next video, I will use a cup to store the mixed color. I will sand the surface to fit in. And I will rip the black tape to show the McDonald's logo. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel and means a lot to me. And if you got anything to say, feel free to leave the comment below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in next one. Peace.